Hi, my name is Carlos Rafael Rivera. I'm a composer and associate professor at the Frost School of Music, and I'm super excited to share with you a scene that is near and dear to my heart. It's from a show I scored called The Queen's Gambit. Now, the scene takes place towards the end of the story, so spoiler alert, Beth wins. That's the scene we're going to actually analyze. So, what I'd like to first do is play back the entire scene as it was approved by writer-director Scott Frank. Once we play it back, what I'd like to do is analyze the scene itself, looking at the structure and story points. That will enable us to get some ideas as to where exactly to place some melodic material and ideas, and that will help build the scaffolding upon which the cue will hopefully be approved. Next, that will be realizing a piano sketch that's just a little bit fuller, and then, of course, the orchestral realization of it using Spitfire symphonic orchestral libraries, which are awesome. So actually, you're going to get to hear them right now. So let's get to it because there's a lot to cover. Here we go.
It's your game. Take it.
Thank you. Good for you, Cracker. Good for you.
The president has invited you to the White House. There'll be a chessboard set up in the Oval Office, and of course a photo op of you kicking his ass.
So that's the sequence. What's amazing to me is that this is all realized with sample libraries. And I'm very amazed at where the technology has reached today in order to enable us to produce demos of this quality. So let's get to analyzing the scene. But before that, I did want to mention something that I find is pretty important to know. I left these tracks just showing at the beginning as we were playing things back because they are the production track. This is the dialogue and this is the effects track, the sound track that you're actually writing to. And I always score and write with them on. I never really turn them off until I'm nearing the end of it just to make sure all the balances are right. But it's a good practice to get into from the onset, especially for those of you who are just starting to get into scoring. Make sure you always have this going on because it's the landscape upon which your music's going to live. So understanding where it is will be of big help. Things like this, for example, usually you'll get a much busier track, but sometimes a little something like this can make a difference. Right here. It's there, and you got to pay attention to it. And actually, when I trigger the music, it's right after the flash, not on it. Anyways, so now let's analyze the scene itself. One of the important things to be thinking about when you're actually going to score is location. Instead of having to score one long idea that goes across like whatever time, if you start thinking about when and where things are happening, it makes you think about writing different sections. And so the first thing we're going to look at is this location. Right now we're starting in an interior. This is where Beth's inside, she wins, people are clapping, and then we're in one location. And from here, it switches to a second location. This is where Benny and Harry Beltic and the twins are getting the news, and I think they're in New York or something. So they get the news, and of course, they find out she won, and they're super excited. But for us, what matters is that it's location number 2, right? Then we're going to move on to location number 3. And that's where Jolene is, and she's getting the news. And I think she's like in Kentucky or something. I'm not really sure exactly where she is, but I know she's not with Benny or anybody else. So that's a third location, a third potential idea, or not, but you're thinking that way, hopefully. And then we're going to cut back to Beth winning and walking outside to the adoring crowd. And that gives us our fourth and final section, if you will. But what I love about what Scott Frank did here is that he added what I like to call a cherry on top, which is after the sequence and we're surrounded by all of this adoring crowd, he anchors us into a character, and that would be Townes. You have a nice push into Townes where she's going to kind of focus in on him. And for us, it's a compositional opportunity for sure. And of course, then the sequence ends. That's our structure. That gives us the beginning of something to write with. So before we get into the melodic ideas, I want to tell you why the melodic ideas. One of the very fortunate events that happened with this particular project is that this sequence was given to me towards the end of it. And I had been working on it for kind of nearly 2 years. And one of the things I'd really developed was different thematic ideas for different characters. Townes had a motif. Beth didn't have just one theme. Beth had many themes for different aspects of her character. If she was up to something, there was a little bit of a motif. If she was winning, there was victory music, which is the first thing we'll hear. Anyways, let's get to that victory music, if you will. And I'm going to switch over here to the actual sketch that we ended up using. So I ended up assigning the victory music to this sequence. And this particular location, but more specifically, this particular moment. What I want to do is minimize the screen so we can actually look at some of the music that's happening. And what I wanted to bring out was that I had written victory music for Beth before. This plays when she beats Harry Beltic, I think in episode 2 or so. So I did a reprise of it, or reprise, depending on how you want to say it. But the point is, that's something I did. And I assigned it to this specific moment. I didn't start it any sooner. I started at the moment the hand clenches, as soon as that happens. And the reason for it was very personal. There's a moment in a movie called Out of Africa where Robert Redford is flying with Meryl Streep over the savannah, and she reaches back at the peak of a very important moment, and she just kind of just holds his hand. And that was scored beautifully by John Barry, and I love that score. Anyways, that's the impetus for this little moment. So let's check out and see how it works. Coincidentally, the music is working, but it also tends to kind of land on some of the cuts, and those are happy accidents you kind of go with. One thing I did know is that this melody couldn't go for the entire cue, right? But because it's working in this location, I figured, well, maybe let me just try to make it work for this location only and figure out what the heck am I going to do next? Because it's a long cue, as you can even see by the timeline. So let's go on to the next section. The next section was kind of built out of an idea I had. And it was something based in a moment that happens in the main title. What happens in the main title, there's a little bit of music that's kind of game music, and it's sort of a transitional bit. And what it does is this. I think it goes, right? That last bit was Borgoff's theme, but this is a very aggressive little motif. And what I wanted to do was try to change it and make it a little bit more emotional. So let me play for you what I did. And this is the actual sketch of me recording. I recorded it on the piano that's outside this room, but just so you can get a sense of it. when I started writing that, I was like, wow, this feels like it's a cool little sequence of music notes that kind of feels emotional, like it's doing something. Then I actually just brought it into the scene. I plopped it in. You can see final music sketch, right? Listen to how it lays to the picture. Wrong notes and all, so. That moment is the beginning of a repetition of the entire thing. It's a loop. However, for us music nerds, it's kind of a cool thing because the first one starts, right? But this repetition doesn't happen there again, and it starts here. And when I landed on that, I was like, yes, because it's one of the really cool, fortunate moments. Because what that means is that with that idea, that long line melody repeating a fifth up or a fourth down, however you want to call it, it generates so much material that you could go on forever. So what I started thinking was maybe I can use that across Benny and Jolene's sequence, covering sequence 2 and 3. After I have that, I started thinking, well, how do I get to the fourth scene? And what is the fourth scene? It's going to be Beth stepping outside, right? Into the audience. And that, I used something else. I had another motif I had written for Beth developing, her development motif. And I think it went something like this. Right? That little motif happens when she's training with Mr. Scheibel. It also happens when she's training with Benny. And of course, if there's anything to a development motif, it's this moment because she's her fully developed self walking into this crowd. And I thought, well, let maybe see if it can work. So I kind of laid it in. And here it is. Let me mute that guy. Here. It felt right. But now we got to get to the cherry on top, and that is another thing I had done. I had written a motif for Towns. As a matter of fact, I had written a motif for her curiosity for boys or falling in love or in like with someone. And it started when she was a girl looking outside from the orphanage. She sees a boy who's smoking a cigarette and says hello. I played the motif there. Then I played it when she sees a couple kissing. And then I certainly made it happen when she sees Towns for the first time. So now we're getting to reprise that as well. And this is what it sounds like. And one thing I wanted to say is that the cue doesn't end. I don't know if you noticed, but it doesn't have a sense of finality, does it? Listen. It feels like it's missing. I can't play it. I should have. I had it, but I didn't. Here we go. It should have done this. Right? Let me play it again and give you an ending, if you will. Right? It feels like it's over. However, the scene is over, but the story isn't. And that's another thing to think about when you're writing a cue. You don't need to necessarily end it at the end or in tonic. It's nice to leave it open, especially as we're going into another scene. Something to think about. Okay, this is the piano sketch as it was realized. I'm going to play you just a bit of it so I can jump into the next portion, which is going to be the orchestral realization of it. But let's begin just by playing it a little bit more realized. As a matter of fact, what I'd like to do is play you the section going into Benny, just so you can get familiar with it, because I'm going to address that in a few seconds about something else. Here we go. It's fuller now, right? There's more texture to it. Sequence repeated. It's the same but different. And then we get to Beth stepping out. Okay, so now we have our scaffolding, we have our nice piano sketch, and it's ready to go. Now, if I'd sent this to Scott Frank and said, hey, here my cue is done, he would have fired me. So you don't want to get fired from your job. You have to take it to the next level. And the next level requires musical libraries that sound pretty darn good. What I'd like to do next is now see how we actually orchestrate this little bit of music from piano to the demo that Scott will approve. The first thing I'd like to do is kind of go through these libraries and just talk a little bit about them. This is Spitfire Symphony, and I'm going to start with the first one that I'm using is flutes, legato, and basic wind families are being used, right? You have your flutes, you have your oboe, and you can see it here. And one thing I did want to mention is about the mics. I love, personally, the tree mic. The tree mic is consistent in all of them. And I just love the sound that it captures, and I tend to have it a very consistent. I'm a fan of it just as it is. I put the tree mic, crank it all the way to the top, and go. So we have the two flutes, we have the oboe, and we have the clarinets, right? Let's hear how they sound alone to the scene. Here we go. And they're something that really enhances the melodic idea as it's being played. And when in doubt, if you want to add them to the melody, it's always going to be a good thing. And they really help move the cue over. That's what the winds are doing for this moment. But let's listen to the brass. And you'll notice what they're doing, or their purpose, is going to be a little bit of more depth to the sequence itself. Here we go. From the moment they hold hands again. The horns, I could spend all day talking about them, but obviously we don't have that much time. But the horns are something I always go to, this specific one. Horns are too long. I love them. They're always helpful for the heroic moment. They fit beautifully. And here, playing the theme along with the rest of it sounds really powerful to me, at least. And with the winds, pretty cool. Now what I like to do is move on to the strings themselves so you can hear what they're doing in the same exact section again. Here we go. What's fun about the strings is that not only are they playing the melody, but they're also doing a lot of movement, of motoric movement, if you will. Listen to how they're playing towards the beginning. Hear that? Now, what that is really based on the piano sketch that we had. Listen to them along with the piano, and you can see what the movement of the piano is that it's doing. Let me bring up the actual piano roll. Here, listen to it. Right? Da 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 da. Right? That little bit da 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 is something that's already there in the sketch, but when you get to realize it with the piano, it's pretty powerful. Speaking of piano, I want to move on to the middle section. I talked about Benny, and then it switches to Jolene. Well, let me play you the piano sketch one more time for that moment, and notice that the piano isn't doing much to help us tell the story as a sketch alone. This is what I mean by that. Check this moment out. They're getting the news that Beth won, right? The pianist is just playing, and they freak out. We need to kind of freak out with them, but we don't, do we? Listen. Pianist is still playing. Right? That's where orchestration really comes in and helps. It really adds a whole other dimension to the same exact music. Listen to how it works now with the orchestra for the same exact moment. And notice the piano is there, but then you'll see. She won. Here we go. And that idea of kind of growing and then coming back down, that helps, because now we're able to continue the same piano idea with its loop into a very intimate moment. Flute and horn. It's Jolene, and I did want to pause for a moment because that little horn moment is something that's kind of special to me. I don't know why, but when I was a kid, there was a band called Chicago, and they had a song called "If You Leave Me Now, You Take Away the Biggest Part." Well, whatever, if you don't know it, sorry, but it's cool, and it starts with this opening that goes dun 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 bo. I don't know if it was trombone or flugelhorn or God knows what, but it always stuck with me. I loved that moment. Even when I was a kid, I was like, what is that? And so for some reason, when I get to this moment, I got to score it. That little horn was like a thing. This leads us to this next moment. What the sketch was this sort of idea of, I don't know if I have the piano selected, but the idea of a very simple kind of, this is it, sorry, here we go. Beth's development thing with the motor. When you go to orchestration, sometimes it's really cool to kind of add to the piano. It's nice to go into the harp. And so let's listen to what the harp is doing at that exact same moment. Right? One of the cool things you can do with winds in a moment like this is actually activate it. I like thinking of it in that way, or adding a motor to it. Listen to what the clarinets are doing at the same time. Now, this is subtle stuff, but it really propels the scene forward from its original sketch, right? And even if to that wind section you add trumpets, doing something like this, you keep moving forward. And with that, I'd actually like to go back and play the entire scene again, and the hopes that this time you're going to be paying attention to it in a very different way than when you first heard it. So I'm going to go back, play it one more time, and we'll call it a day, I guess. Here we go. Without dialogue or sound, just to hear the music. Let me expand this so you can see it, and just think about it. Here we go. I want to thank you so much for sticking with me till the end of this. It's been a real privilege to get to share this sequence from the Queen's Gambit with you. And the purpose of all of this is to help you improve upon the work I'm doing myself. The idea of what we're doing is improving the work of the entire industry and moving it forward. And having a platform such as this is truly a gift for me. So I want to thank you for your attention, and hopefully you do apply some of these tools and share them and move forward. Thank you so much, and I'll see you around.